15 GMT, you're watching TRT World. I'm Yashni Padiachi in Istanbul. Breaking news this hour, and the Turkish National Intelligence Agency says it's coordinated an extensive prisoner swap amid signs of a major prisoner exchange between Russia and Belarus on one side and the US, Germany and Slovenia on the other. The Turkish Intelligence Agency stated a prisoner exchange operation took place today under the coordination of the agency. According to a statement, Türkiye played a major mediation role in this exchange operation, which is the most comprehensive of the recent period. That is according to the statement. 26 people, including 2 children, are said to be involved in the swap. We're going to go to Ankara and speak to our correspondent, Rupert Stone. And Rupert, you've been keeping up to date with the latest developments. Turkish intelligence has issued a statement. What have they been saying?
Well, it's a pretty long and detailed statement, and I can give you some of the information from it. Particularly of interest, it gives some of the identities of the prisoners who've been released. Those are 26 prisoners in total on 7 flights, and those are, as we know, Evan Gershkovich and the US Marine Paul Whelan, who've been imprisoned in Russia, the German mercenary Rico Krieger, who'd been imprisoned in Belarus, Russian dissident Ilya Yashin, and the FSB Colonel Vadim Krasakov, who'd been imprisoned in Germany. So we have those details there. Of course, there must be other prisoners in addition to those ones who aren't named. Now, the statement does say that MIT was clearly closely involved in this process, both as a mediator between the parties and in the logistics and practicalities of actually exchanging the prisoners, which has occurred today at Esenboğa Airport. And the statement goes into detail saying that MIT, the National Intelligence Organization, ensured that all security measures, logistical planning and exchange activity requirements were met and facilitated communication between the parties and so on. And actually, what stands out for me in this statement is the last part of it, where it goes into a kind of there's a segment describing MIT's role in Turkish foreign policy, saying that in this period of escalating tensions around the world, Türkiye continues to contribute to peace and stability in the international arena, and that MIT, which remains committed to maintaining open channels of dialogue in all forms of international conflict, are currently taking measures to establish common platforms for mediation. And MIT has been involved as a mediator in other contexts. I'm thinking specifically at the moment of Iraq. MIT has been involved in Turkey's diplomacy with Iraq, specifically its security diplomacy. When most people hear the words intelligence organization, they think of an organization that gathers information. And MIT does that, but it's also engaged in secret diplomacy, and this prisoner exchange today is a fruit of that. And in that respect, it's not necessarily unusual that the CIA has also been engaged in diplomacy. In fact, the CIA director has just been in Rome engaged in talks surrounding Gaza. So this does seem to be a function that is performed occasionally by intelligence agencies, but MIT is particularly effective at it, it seems.
And Rupert, this really speaks to the ability of the Turkish government when it comes to negotiations, and that the role that they play in negotiations. One of the most prominent of those deals was, of course, the grain deal brokered between Ukraine and Russia when that war broke out.
Yes, exactly. And Türkiye, because it does have a wide array of international partnerships, it It's partnered with countries really across the geopolitical spectrum, from Russia to countries like the United States, United Kingdom, which, if you like, are in an opposing power bloc to Russia. And that array of political relationships enables Türkiye to play this mediation role, to act as a diplomatic bridge between opposing antagonists, if you like. As we've seen again in this case, and the grain deal is an example of that, where it did broker that agreement between Ukraine and Russia. Türkiye has also been involved in efforts towards finding peace in Ukraine in some of those earlier talks in 2022. So it'd be interesting to speculate if this success, this prisoner exchange, could actually catalyse renewed peace talks for Ukraine, and whether Türkiye may again replicate some of its mediation role in that format.
Rupert Stone in Ankara, thank you very much for the latest there. And the pictures you're looking at are from the Esenboğa airport in Ankara, where we understand that there have been 7 aircraft landing there involved in this prisoner exchange of 26 people between several countries. It is the biggest one since the Cold War between the US and Russia. And when it comes to the Americans being exchanged, they'd been imprisoned in Russia and include Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and former US Marine Paul Whelan. Let's take a look at their plight now. Evan Gershkovich was arrested by Russia in 2023. He was convicted just last month on the 19th of July and sentenced to 16 years. He was found guilty of spying and espionage. His employer and the US government rejected that verdict, saying the charges were fabricated. US President Joe Biden said Gershkovich was, quote, targeted by the Russian government because he is a journalist and an American. Meanwhile, Whelan was detained by Russian authorities for more than 5 years. He was also arrested in Moscow on espionage charges, but in 2018. He was then convicted 2 years later in 2020. Both Whelan and the US government have dismissed the charges, calling them baseless. We're going to take you to Moscow now to speak to Dasha Chernyshova. Dasha, have we had any official reaction yet from the Kremlin?
Well, indeed, we have heard from the Russian presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov, who said that he hopes the Kremlin will be able to provide the comment as early as later in the day. The Kremlin has repeatedly said that it is not going to discuss these issues in public, and such talks have to be taking place in secrecy. But now we also have heard Dmitry Peskov saying on this prisoner swap that let all the enemies who left Russia stay away and those non-enemies can come back home. Now, this is the reaction we have to this moment, but obviously the understanding is that this deal is finally taking place after months, if not years, of tough negotiations and very difficult talks between all sides involved. Keep in mind it is the largest and unprecedented in scale prisoner exchange deal between Russia and the United States. That involves also in total 7 countries and more than 20 prisoners who have been kept in these 7 countries. So certainly for the area of diplomacy, for the area of talking, this is unprecedented. But Moscow has been always hinting that these talks are taking place, but again insisted that they have been should be taking place in secrecy. We also have previously seen such prisoner swaps taking place. The most recent one taking place in December 2022, when Brittany Griner was exchanged for Russia's Viktor Bout, and he came back to Russia, and Griner managed to go back to the US. And obviously after the hasty trial of Evan Gershkovich, Wall Street Journal reporter, the understanding was that this deal is absolutely imminent and could be taking place anytime soon. So here we are.
Here we are indeed. And Dasha, what do we know about the Russian prisoners on the list and who's expected to return to Russia?
Well, First of all, we understand that Russia most of all wanted the return of Vadim Krasikov. This is the FSB colonel who was accused of the assassination of the Chechen leader in Germany. He was sentenced to years behind bars, and that was also something that Moscow really wanted to make sure that he is coming back to Russia. And even the Russian president, in one of his recent interviews to the US journalist Tucker Carlson, he also hinted that there is a man in Germany who is in prison for the assassination of this Chechen colonel who, according to the Russian president, was also responsible for the killing of the Russian soldiers earlier in Russia's history. We also understand that on this list there will be the couple that was sentenced to prison time in Slovenia. They were accused of espionage. We also understand that there will be some hackers and cyber criminals that have been sentenced in the US. Those are the Russian nationals that will be coming back home. But many analysts here in Russia now wonder why this deal is uneven, why there are more foreigners than Russians on this list, so why there are fewer people coming back to Russia. Also, interestingly, we are seeing some names of the opposition journalists as well as opposition figures who have been sentenced, who are Russian nationals, who have been sentenced to prison time in Russia, and they will be released as part of this deal. They include Ilya Yashin, who has been labeled as terrorist and extremist in Russia. They also include Oleg Orlov, who has been heading the organization of Memorial. He is over 70 years already, so many of the opposition members here in Russia have all been saying that if he is part of that deal, then how his life will be built on if he has to live outside Russia.
There are so many questions, of course, that we're waiting to get answers for. And as you say, we're expecting reaction from the Kremlin in the coming hours. Have we had any reaction from ordinary Russians, though, especially those who are opposed to the Kremlin and some of their policies? You were speaking there about the Kremlin critic Ilya Yashin also being one of those prisoners released.
Yes, indeed, we have heard from the opposition supporters that they are relieved to see those names on this list. They are relieved that these people will not die in prison, as it happened to Alexei Navalny, also labeled as terrorist and extremist, as he passed away earlier this year while being in the Arctic prison in Harp. We also understand that they are all very grateful for the diplomatic and negotiations effort that have been taking place over the course of the past months, because the understanding is indeed that this deal was very difficult and very complicated. First of all, because of the number of the people involved, and secondly, because of the logistics of all these operations. Keep in mind that people who have been on this list, they had to be pardoned and their documents had to be prepared. So over the course of the past few days, we have heard from the lawyers, from the family members, that they couldn't find and establish the whereabouts of many of those prisoners. And this is when the opposition members have been saying that they will only believe that this is taking place when they hear this has actually happened, and that's probably one of the moments when they can finally relieve and give a good sigh of relief as this has finally taken place. But again, we are waiting for the confirmation from the Kremlin and for the list of the names that the Kremlin will be providing.
We'll certainly be checking in with you when that happens. Dasha Chernyshova in the Russian capital. Thank you very much, Dasha, there bringing us the update from Moscow on this breaking news that we're covering for you. The prisoner exchange swap deal, the biggest since the Cold War between Russia and the United States. It involved several other countries, Russia, the US and Germany being some of them. Turkish intelligence and Turkish officials playing a mediation role here. The deal was brokered by Turkish intelligence. They have released a statement saying that there were 26 individuals from prisons from 7 different countries, and they were brought here to Türkiye, to the capital Ankara, in 7 different aircraft, including 2 from the US and 1 each from Germany, Poland, Slovenia, Norway and Russia. That's all part of that prisoner exchange deal. It's the most extensive prisoner exchange between the US, Russia and Germany in recent years. And they include several high-profile figures who have been in the media, including Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. And we're going to go now to the US, to Washington, D.C., to speak to Craig Boswell about this. And Craig, we haven't yet had any official reaction from US officials, but I understand that a White House briefing is expected, as well as comments possibly from the US State Department.
Of course, and you are correct. There's been no official statement from the U.S. administration, from the White House. All the information we're getting confirmed is from a senior White House official. But as previous reporters have noticed in various parts of the globe right now, an historic prisoner swap, a rare example of cooperation between the U.S. and Russia at a time when their tensions have just been increasing and increasing and increasing, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And this, of course, taking place after years and years of back-channel kind of negotiations. So we've reached out to several folks, including Reporters Without Borders, who had kind of one word that they are highlighting as relieved at this prisoner exchange regarding the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich. And of course, Reporters Without Borders went on to note that there are at least 40 other journalists being held, because that's what they do. But look, families of these two, that are Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan, are in Washington, D.C. They're at a hotel. They have been waiting to meet with President Biden, waiting anxiously, I'm sure. And we'll take these kind of one at a time, particularly when you look at Paul Whelan, the U.S. Marine, the former U.S. Marine, who was arrested in 2018, convicted in 2020. When you look at a couple of previous hostage deals in 2022 with their former U.S. Marine Trevor Reed in April 2022, and of course the WNBA star Brittany Griner in December of 2022, there was a surprise at that point, at that December prisoner swap, that Paul Whelan had not been included in that prisoner swap. And there was a great deal of frustration from the Whelan family that had not taken place. I can recall being on Capitol Hill when family members had testified before Congress on trying to push on efforts to in hostage diplomacy to kind of get these folks home. Big picture, of course, here is 10 hostages, including 2 children, were transferred to Russia, 13 sent to Germany, and 3 to the U.S., 2 specifically that we're talking about. You have to go back to 1985 for an exchange of 23 Westerners to get kind of anywhere close to this magnitude of a deal between to release prisoners. Now, Evan Gershkovich, the Wall Street Journal reporter, 32 years old, also sentenced to 16 years, in which President Biden had called an absolute sham of a trial. As we talked earlier, and we noted that the conviction and the trial and the sentence all taking place on the same day. Interesting family, the Gershkovich family. They had fled the former Soviet Union in 1979 and had come to the U.S. So Gershkovich had been kind of immersed in Russian culture from his parents. He loved the Russian culture. His friends at the Wall Street Journal describe him as gregarious, energetic, always smiling. And he kind of went to Russia, was kind of immersed himself in there, would camp out for weeks in like in Siberia, covering the wildfires. If you've gone back and read much of his reporting. He moved to Moscow 2017, very much involved in what he really his life and his work. And so Wall Street Journal reporters certainly relieved as the Reporters Without Borders. One other thing to mention, the Bring Our Families Home campaign is calling this kind of a legacy kind of piece for President Biden. So we're going to hear from President Biden. We're likely going to see a meeting at some point today between President Biden and these families. One other thing, when you talk about Paul Whelan, who had been arrested since 2018, we're going to be hearing about this prisoner swap on the campaign trail, right? We're going to hear from former President Trump, because he was Trump was president at the time when this happened. So you're going to hear from former President Trump on this on the campaign trail. You're going to hear from President Biden, and of course you'll hear from Vice President Harris, as she is now campaigning to replace President Biden, to talk about these negotiations and how this is a legacy thing for the White House and bringing folks home and cooperating with Russia, trying to ease tensions, and maybe in some of this hostage diplomacy, maybe even trying to work around talking about even further deals with others that are hostages. But the administration has been clear that journalists are not spies, and that these particularly Evan Gershkovich was targeted because he was a journalist and American. So we are looking forward to seeing that reunion. You have to imagine these families right now just on pins and needles. This is absolutely excruciating for them as they are in these last moments, just waiting for that final hurdle to be cleared where they can actually meet and hug their loved ones.
Yeah.
And greet them and meet them home and have them back in their lives
and absolutely,
on a daily basis.
Absolutely, Craig, and that would be for all these prisoners who've been released now, people waiting for their family members to arrive home. And you mentioned there that the US president will most likely comment on this, but of course, everything that seems to happen now, whether it is at a local, domestic level in the US or at an international level, it all somehow comes back to these upcoming presidential elections. Biden, Harris, Trump will all be talking about this because, of course, in the last few years, that relationship between the US and Russia, of course, has not been very good, given what's happening in Ukraine. But there has been comment from some who are saying that this could be a new chapter, possibly because these negotiations would have been happening behind the scenes between these two countries, even if there were mediation efforts with other countries that have good relations with the US and Russia.
Right. Of course, there are the formal diplomatic channels. Then there are the back channels, which a lot of this likely took place. But as you correctly noted, successful diplomacy is going to be a key part, a centerpiece of presidential campaigns. It'll be a key centerpiece likely for congressional campaigns as we learn more, as we find out if there were senators or representatives involved in some of these negotiations. So yeah, successful diplomacy is going to be a key part of this. And of course, future successful diplomacy is something that likely will come up very soon after this. It's like, who's next? You know, because as I mentioned, Reporters Without Borders has noted other journalists in the dozens still being held in prisons, and there'll be efforts to begin bringing them home. But of course, but right now the focus on the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan, the U.S. Marine, as they are. Reports are saying, Bloomberg has reported, which actually broke this story, that they could be home as early as today, which has us, of course, focusing on the White House and any type of a meeting that would take place in the Oval Office. As I mentioned, families are here. They're waiting to meet with the president. They're likely being briefed far more than we are at this point, as well they should. And then we'll see. We'll certainly see the look of relief on their face in these last excruciating moments as they wait to see their loved ones. And you know, when you talk about Evan Gershkovich, there had been times where family members had tried to get in touch with, they would write letters and tried to visit with him. They had gone there at some point to try and meet with him, got to talk with him a little bit, and now they're going to get to see him in person very soon. So that has to be very, very exciting for them. Back to you.
Exciting and a relief, exactly. Craig Boswell in Washington, D.C. I know you'll be keeping us up to date with all the latest developments coming out from there. And for our viewers who have just tuned in to TRT World, the developing story we're tracking for you at this hour is a prisoner swap deal that's taken place between the U.S., Russia and Germany. It's believed to be the biggest one since 1985. And as we heard from our correspondent, correspondents there. 3 high-profile U.S. prisoners will be brought back to the United States, including Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich and Marine Paul Whelan. Paul Whelan, who has been in a Russian jail since 2018. We're going to get some analysis on all of this now with Ben Aris in Berlin. He's the editor-in-chief at BNE IntelliNews. And Ben, thanks for joining us with this breaking news. Firstly, your reaction to this news?
Yeah, it's very encouraging. It's a happy day, isn't it? That the people that have been let out of the Russian jails. Again, Evan Gershkovich has got a lot of the attention. He's a sort of celebrity, the American journalist, but it's a who's who of Russian opposition leaders that have also been released. Yashin, Kara-Murza, 2 of the heads of Navalny's regional political organization were let out. Also, Oleg Orlov, who is the founder, the former head of Memorial. Memorial is Russia's first grassroots NGO that was dealing with the Stalin era and, bringing Russia to accept its awful past in those days. And these people have all been let out. And it's pretty much, they're all the most significant political prisoners in Russia. So that's extremely good news. And I think it's interesting to note that, one of the weird things about this deal is the disparity in the numbers, because normally in diplomacy, it's a tit-for-tat, one-for-one kind of trade. And I count 16 people have been released from Russian jails, and about 8 have been released from Western jails. And that's unusual. And I think in that sense, the Kremlin has made a concession here. Which is also a good sign. Perhaps it's even an olive branch of some sort.
Why do you think the Kremlin has made these concessions, and why at this point where relationships between the West and Russia are so tense?
Well, it comes, I think, in the context, and this is speculation on my part, but it comes in the context of the Ukrainian war. And the Kremlin has been signaling very loudly in the last few months that it's open for talks and that Putin's implying that he wants to bring it to an end. And of course, the relations between East and West are terrible. But Putin's offered to go back to the Istanbul deal, peace deal that was agreed with Ukraine right at the beginning of the war. And I think it's very interesting the timing of this deal, this prisoner swap, such a large and really extremely high-profile swap, could be in the same context. It's signaling again that Putin's willing to and able to negotiate, and that he is perhaps being willing to give away some concessions to the US, because again, this is a huge feather in the cap for Biden. But it's very interesting that Putin would be willing to do this deal now. And of course, Zelensky has called for a second peace summit in November. That's going to go ahead, and the plan is to invite both Russia and China to that. And so there's a real opportunity there to at least begin, real ceasefire talks. And putting this swap into that context, I think you could take it as a sign that Russia's ready to deal.
Is this then a good step in the right direction towards, as you say, expected talks to take place in November, but at a point where Ukraine and Russia are ready to negotiate to bring to an end a war that's taken, I believe it's more than 2 years now, but taken a massive toll on both sides?
Indeed. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, for the Russians, I mean, they've got the upper hand. They've had the initiative already since the beginning of the year when the States stopped funding Ukraine for 6 months. But it's costing Russia a lot of resources, manpower. Inflation's running extremely high. That they're looking at long-term stagnation because they've been cut off from technology. And Putin's after some sort of security deal. I mean, the headline there was always that some ban on Ukraine ever joining NATO. But while he can keep it up longer than the Ukrainians can, he can't keep it up forever. And I think he's got to the point where he's happy to declare victory. He wants to take his security deal out of the upcoming negotiations. And then after that, if he gets that, then he's going to start the long, slow process of repairing the damage that's been done, trying to get the sanctions off, restarting trade, allowing technology imports in again. And so you could see this as preparing the ground. The problem is, as I said many times before, the two sides are so far apart that it's going to be very difficult to get any kind of deal out of this. But then on the Ukrainian side, I mean, Zelensky's the instigator of the second peace conference this November. And moreover, this week he talked about holding a referendum in Ukraine, asking the Ukrainian people if they would be okay with Ukraine ceding some territory to Russia. And that's a key point, because he's been flat out saying that we're not going to do that. And now he's preparing the ground for possibly giving some territory away. And if he's prepared to do that, then there is some common grounds for a negotiated deal. So things are starting to look a bit more positive in terms of actually closing a ceasefire deal.
When it comes to that ceasefire deal, what then is the role that the United States plays in this? The United States, of course, having given Ukraine so much support diplomatically and militarily.
Well, of course, the States is the main player. I mean, Putin's constant complaint is about what he calls the unipolar world, in other words, a hegemony that's run by the US. And when this whole diplomacy started just before the war, the Kremlin dealt with exclusively the White House in terms of trying to get this no NATO guarantee on Ukraine. And so the States is going to be at the table, but they're going to be facing across the table at Russia and China combined. And in this sense, Putin holds the trump card because he can just continue the war for several more years. I mean, the Russian economy is hurting, but it's in good shape. It's on a war footing, and it can keep this up for several more years. They have plenty of money. And that's not true for Ukraine. Ukraine is expecting to run out of money, men, and arms in the next 2 years. And moreover, they're facing a catastrophic winter after Russia destroyed half their power sector. So the pressure's definitely on the US side to try and, broker a deal and get something out of it. And it remains to be seen, how hard Putin is going to play at the negotiating table. But again, in the context of what happened today with these prisoners, I think Putin was going to be pragmatic, or at least he should be, if he does want to really stop this war, because this is a second opportunity to do it. And if it doesn't get done in November, then it's going to be very difficult to get to a third option, because Ukraine will just be put in a progressively more difficult position.
Ben, do you think that we could see more concessions now from Russia going forward, especially after this big prisoner exchange, as you said, 16 people released from Russian jails?
No, I think that's it for the moment. I mean, he's made his gesture. It was a very spectacular one. As I say, in diplomacy, it's very unusual, it being very lopsided. And again, as I said, the people who were released from Russian jails are all very significant in domestic politics. Whereas the people that were released on the Western side, they're basically a bunch of criminals, a couple of spies. The key one was Krasikov, who's an FSB agent, assassin, and who was caught. He shot someone to death here in Berlin and was doing life in jail. And I think that was actually the key name that put this whole deal turned on. The Germans played a crucial role here, letting him out. And Putin wanted him back than anybody else because he's FSB. And, Putin wants to show the FSB, which is the bedrock of his power, his grip on power in Russia. He wanted to show them that, I take care of our own. And if one of our guys is in jail, I'll get him out.
Ben Aris, always good to get your analysis. Appreciate it very much. And thank you for joining us as we continue to follow this breaking news story for you. Stay with us, the Newsmakers, after this.